he called out to God. He didn't give up. And God was with him. And we see in the end, God rescued him from that as well, right? King David was desperate for God because he knew he belonged to God. From the very beginning, he was an honest guy. He knew he belonged to God and he needed God. He knew that his loneliness couldn't be filled by friendships. His loneliness couldn't be filled by relationships. His loneliness couldn't be filled by status, by achievement, by power. His loneliness could only be filled by God himself. He just skipped down on trying other things and went straight to God. Right? He knew when he didn't understand life, why is this happening? Right? Instead of going against God, he went to God. And he was desperate to understand and desperate for God's leading and guiding in his life, even in the hardest of times. He had a lot of pain, a lot of hurts, right? If you read two of my favorite books in the Bible, is 1st and 2nd Samuel. How many of you guys have read that? You've got to read it. This is better than Harry Potter. This is better than, I'm serious. You want a story about deception, about love, about hate, about betrayal, about war, about love. I mean, you just name it. It's in this book, these two books. 1st and 2nd Samuel. You have to read it. It's awesome, right? But we see that David had a lot of hurts and pains. You know, he was hated a lot of times by his family, by his brothers, right? And you see that throughout the story, right? He made a lot of mistakes. He was no perfect human being. There isn't, right? He was honest with that. He made a lot of mistakes, and he turned to God in those mistakes. He knew only God could heal him of these hurts and pains. He also knew that only God could satisfy his need for unconditional love. When he was king, he had like hundreds of wives. That's a lot of relationships, right? He had people at his beck and call, but he knew that wasn't enough. Whether he was in rags in a cave or in a nice kingly garb in a kingdom, he knew only God could fill his need for unconditional love. Right? And he experienced that when he doesn't do something right, you know, he doesn't get the love from people. But with God, whether he does something right or wrong or whatever, God accepts him and loves him and is with him. And he knew that, and he held on to that. He knew only God could protect him and give him the justice he longed for. Right now, guys, with the economy crumbling and just things happening around us, right? Natural disasters, things literally feeling like they're crumbling, right? And people desperate for protection, right? This is especially a time where we need to cry out for God for that. David knew only God, whether he's in a cave or wherever where the people hate him or love him, only God could protect him. And he asked for that from God. He didn't try to get it anywhere else, right? We become desperate for God when we are like David and we take a nice, sober, honest look at our lives, right? When we honestly look inside and realize, wow, we're really not perfect. Wow, we really don't have control. Wow, we really need things and we can't, for some reason, meet those needs ourselves. When we have a sober judgment of who we are and we honestly look at ourselves, we realize we need God. We need a miracle. We need something and someone to save us. I didn't become a Christian until later in my life. That's why when I look at young people like you guys who are passionate for the Lord, I'm like, something that we need to survive. And the second thing is, desperation makes you do foolish, stupid, and crazy things. And I want to talk about how when it's geared towards God, good things can come out of it. Yes, you might do something stupid and crazy, but if you're doing it in God, good things can actually come out of it. And we see these things in the life of King David. And he's such a prime example. How many of you guys have read the Psalms? Some of you have, right? I love it because it's not all happy. Did you know that? A lot of times we preach on just the happy Psalms. Oh, I praise you, God. I love you, God. You are good, God. But there are some Psalms where he was not happy. And he expressed that to God. God, where are you? God, help me. I feel like I'm dying. Yeah, it's in your Bibles, right? And I love the Psalms because it's just so real and raw. And it's sometimes how I feel. And David expresses these things. He is someone who needed God and he knew it. He didn't try to hide it. He didn't try to find it somewhere else. He knew he needed God from the very beginning. We see it in the very beginning of his life. Because you see, David was the last son of Jesse. He's an Israelite. And he had 8 sons, and David was the last one. Okay? And what do we know about sons back then? Especially the firstborn. They get all the money, inheritance, right? They get more of the power. They get whatever the father has, it trickles down to each son, and then the very last bit goes to the last son, right? And so we know from the very beginning that David was kind of a nobody in his family. He was the last one. He was the insignificant one, right? And we also know this because David, what was his job as a child? Shepherd. Someone's reading the Bible here. He was a shepherd. He herded sheep by himself. And I don't know much about it, but when I read about sheep herding, it's pretty boring. And it's a pretty lonely job. You're just sitting out there on a field with all these sheep, and you're alone, right? And they stink, they're eating, whatever, and you're just chilling there. And you just got to take care of them, right? It's a lonely job, and from the very beginning, some of our songs come from that part of his life, of him singing to God in his desperation, in his loneliness. He seeks God, right? And so from the very beginning, he is desperate for God. We also see when he becomes king, right, that he's tested. Who was king before David? Who was the first king of Israel? King Saul. Saul, is that what you said? Okay, right? King Saul, right? He was a king because Israel wanted a king like the other nations, right? So God gave him Saul. And then next after Saul was David. Well, before David becomes king, he comes to work for King Saul. And what does he do? He's like a singer. He's like his entertainer. And something comes over King Saul, and he just develops this hatred for King David. Have you guys ever been hated by someone you don't know why? Okay, just me. All right. But yeah, he was just hated, right? Just, like really hated by this guy for no reason. Okay, and King Saul, he was like crazy. He'd be like, "Hey, David, come sing me that song. I love it." Right? And David's singing, strumming. And then, do you know what he did to him while he was singing? He tried to kill him with spears. He threw spears at him, and he's like, "What is going on? I'm trying to sing, and this guy hates me. He likes me. I don't understand." It was a very hard time for David. He didn't know who he was. He didn't know what he was doing. He felt lost. And we also see a lot of Psalms coming out of that part of his life where he cries out to God, confused. Why, God? Why am I going through this crap? Why does this person hate me? I didn't even do anything to him. Right? And in his desperation for protection, first of all, because he was like literally, being almost murdered every time. But also, in his confusion, he went to God. He was desperate for God even then. Then, after he becomes king, right, his life just doesn't get any better, right? After he becomes king, one of his sons, Absalom, what does he do? He overthrows him. Something comes over Absalom and he says, "You know what? I want to be king before my father dies. So I'm just going to overthrow him now." Right? Crazy, I don't know. So he overthrows, he chases his father out, takes over the throne, and his father, guess where he goes? In a cave. And again, a lot of our Psalms come from that cave. He's in this cave. I mean, how embarrassing to be chased out by your son, right? And to be a king living in a cave. Talk about survival, he's like, I don't know what he's eating, what he's doing, right? This is the king. And in that place of desperation, guess who he saw? God. We have our Psalms that come from that cave, that painful place, again, of confusion, of hurt, of not understanding, of feeling like, why me? David cries out to God. And God is with him, even in that cave. And it wasn't even like a few days. He was there for like years. And year after year, day after day,